Charlotte Collins was on her morning walk through the streets of North End, Hartford, as she did every day. The cold air of that autumn barely registered with her as she pressed on, focused solely on keeping her pace. However, as she passed by a narrow, dimly lit alley, something caught her attention. A low, almost imperceptible sound. A whimper. She stopped immediately. Turning toward the alley, Charlotte hesitated for a moment, but the sound returned, fainter, desperate. She took a few cautious steps forward, and as she got closer, she saw a pile of crumpled boxes at the back. Beneath them, a pair of bright eyes stared back at her. There it was, a skinny pitbull, skin stretched over bones and a dirty black coat. It lay trembling, with small wounds scattered across its body. It looked exhausted, but its eyes still held, something Charlotte couldn't ignore. A silent plea for help. Without thinking twice, she crouched down. "Hey, buddy." "It's okay," she said, her voice soft and calm. The dog flinched slightly, clearly scared, but it didn't have the strength to run away. Charlotte slowly extended her hand, letting it sniff her. After a few seconds of hesitation, the pit bull stopped moving, as if surrendering to the idea that this woman posed no threat. Charlotte looked around. There was no one nearby, no sign that the dog belonged to anyone. It was alone, abandoned. "You don't deserve to go through this," she murmured as she took off her scarf to wrap it around the animal. Despite the strong odor and the dirt, she carefully picked it up in her arms. It was lighter than she expected, as if it hadn't eaten in days. As she walked back to her car, Charlotte felt the dog relax slightly in her arms. It didn't have the strength to resist. "Let's go home," she said, more to herself than to it. She settled it in the back seat, covering it with a blanket she always kept in the car. The dog merely sighed, closing its eyes as if it could finally rest. Charlotte knew her life was full of challenges, but something inside her told her that this encounter was not a coincidence. Without further delay, she started the engine and drove off, already determined. That dog needed her, and she would do whatever it took to help it. When they arrived home, Charlotte immediately began preparing a space for the dog. She improvised a little corner in the living room with soft blankets and a bowl of fresh water. The pit bull, still scared, entered hesitantly, taking slow steps, and curled up in the nearest corner. He made no noise, showed no aggression, but his eyes remained alert, watching Charlotte's every move. In the first few days, he barely touched the food she offered. Charlotte placed bowls of kibble and pieces of cooked chicken next to him and stepped away, trying not to pressure him. Eventually, hunger got the better of him, and he ate slowly, always looking around as if expecting something bad to happen. Charlotte knew it would take time to earn his trust. With patience, she began sitting close to the dog, speaking in a calm, soft voice. "You're safe here. No one is going to hurt you." She repeated this several times, even without knowing if he understood. At first, he just watched her, but as the days went by, something changed. First, he would look at her for a bit longer. Then, there was a slight wag of his tail when she entered the room, small signs that showed he was starting to trust her. After a week, Charlotte decided it was time to give him a name. As she watched him rest in his corner, she noticed how he had started to transform. Even though he was still thin and fragile, there was a strength emerging in him, something she admired. "You're strong like a Jett, you know," she said, smiling. "I'm going to call you Jett." The pit bull lifted his head at the sound of his name, as if recognizing that he now had an identity. As the weeks went by, Jett began to recover. The food and constant care from Charlotte helped him gain weight quickly. His once dull and dirty black coat now shone in the light. He started to walk around the house with more confidence, following Charlotte from room to room, as if he wanted to be near her all the time. More than the physical transformation, It was the emotional change that caught Charlotte's attention. Jett was no longer the scared and withdrawn dog she had found in that alley. He was beginning to show signs of trust and security, moving through the house with more freedom and seeking her presence whenever possible. Sometimes, he would come, close to her, and rest his head in her hand, as if wanting to thank her or just feel the comfort of his new reality. Charlotte knew that Jett was becoming an essential part of her life, a connection that both of them needed to move forward. Sitting on the couch with Jett sleeping beside her, Charlotte couldn't help but let the memories of the past flood her mind. Ethan Martinez, the man she once thought was the love of her life, had turned into her worst nightmare. He had been charming at first, but soon revealed his true self: controlling, cruel, and explosive. Ethan monitored Charlotte's every move, from the people she talked to what she wore. His dependence on alcohol made everything even worse, turning minor arguments into episodes of shouting and eventually pushing and physical abuse. Charlotte tried to resist, tried to believe he could change, but the emotional and physical violence only escalated. Ethan's words still echoed in her mind. "You're nothing without me." Even with her parents' support, who urged her to leave him, she felt trapped, as if she had no strength to escape. The situation only changed when Ethan was arrested for theft. During the trial, Charlotte saw her chance to break free for good. She stayed in North End, at her parents' house, where she sought to rebuild her life. But the scars of the past remained. Even knowing Ethan was behind bars, Charlotte still lived in fear. Small sounds at night startled her, and the possibility of her freedom was a constant and terrifying thought. The trauma didn't disappear, but she learned to hide it, to move forward, even if with every step she felt the weight of the memories. Looking at Jett, however, brought something different. He was a reminder that survival was possible. The dog she had rescued from the brink of fear, and trust was now by her side, sleeping peacefully, confident that he was safe. As she ran her hand over his shiny coat, Charlotte realized that just as Jett was recovering, she could also move forward. He wasn't just a companion, but a symbol that even in the worst circumstances, rebuilding was possible. As the days went by, Jett became a constant presence by Charlotte's side. He was her shadow, following her from room to room in the house. If she was in the kitchen, there he was, lying by the door, watching. If she went up to her bedroom, he accompanied her, lying down at the foot of the bed. Jett never took his eyes off her, as if his mission was to ensure that Charlotte was always safe. Jett's attentiveness extended beyond the house. He was always alert to any strange sounds or unexpected movements. A noise in the hallway or an unexpected visitor would make him lift his head quickly, letting out a low, firm bark. Charlotte knew he wasn't aggressive, but his protective instinct was evident. This made her feel something she hadn't felt in a long time: safety. One night, while Charlotte was lying down, Jett surprised her by jumping onto the bed. He settled next to her, his head resting on her legs, as if he understood that she needed company. Charlotte smiled, touched, and ran her hand over his soft fur. "You're my guardian angel, you know," she whispered, feeling a deep connection with this dog who seemed to understand her pain more than anyone else. When Charlotte's family came to visit her over the weekend, they quickly noticed Jett's behavior. "He doesn't take his eyes off you," her aunt commented, laughing. "It's like he's protecting you from something." Charlotte laughed too, but deep down, she knew there was truth in those words. Jett seemed to have an unusual instinct, a sensitivity that went beyond the ordinary. He wasn't just a loyal dog. He was a friend who, in some way, understood what she needed and was willing to be there for her, always. The afternoon was calm until Charlotte's phone rang. It was one of her childhood friends, her voice on the other end sounding tense. "Charlotte, I don't know how to tell you this, but Ethan has been released." Charlotte's world seemed to stop. The warmth in her face was replaced by a chilling shiver that ran up her spine. "He's asking for you," her friend continued hesitantly. Charlotte thanked her for the call, but as she hung up, panic took over. Without thinking twice, she began locking all the doors and windows in the house, checking each lock and pulling the curtains tight. The sense of safety she had been rebuilding, with so much effort, shattered in seconds. Ethan was free. The man who had destroyed her trust and caused so many emotional scars was on the loose again, and the simple fact that he knew where she might be was enough to bring back the fear she had been trying to bury. The following days were agonizing. Charlotte started to notice small signs that something was wrong. A car parked across the street seemed to be there longer than usual. Some nights, she had the feeling that she was being watched, as if invisible eyes were following her from behind the curtains. Jett also seemed to sense something. He would growl at empty windows, sniff the air intently, and remain on high alert for hours, as if he were waiting for something to happen. Charlotte tried to convince herself it was just paranoia, but the truth was darker. Ethan, obsessed with revenge since the moment he was arrested, had already begun to act. He hired 2 local toughs, men used to intimidating and instilling fear, to follow Charlotte and find ways to emotionally weaken her before he made his own appearance. The plan was simple and cruel: scare her, invade her space, break any sense of safety she still had. Ethan knew that Charlotte was strong, but he also knew how to manipulate her weaknesses, and this time, he was willing to go further. Charlotte, however, still didn't know what was coming. But Jett, ever watchful, seemed to sense that a storm was approaching. The night was silent, with only the occasional sound of the wind rustling the trees outside. Charlotte was sleeping soundly in her room, but Jett, as always, remained alert at the foot of the bed. His ears picked up even the slightest noises, and his eyes were fixed on the door. Something felt different that night, and he sensed it. Around midnight, a low metallic sound broke the silence. 2 masked men forced their way into the house, slowly pushing the front door open. They carried burglary tools and tried to be as quiet as possible as they entered the hallway leading to the bedrooms. One of them pointed towards the end of the hallway, indicating Charlotte's room. However, they didn't realize that Jett was already on high alert. As the intruder's footsteps echoed down the hallway, Jett rose, sniffing the air. A low, threatening growl escaped his throat. The first man paused, hesitant, while the second whispered something, urging him to go on. When the first man tried to advance, Jett sprang into action. His paws hit the intruder's chest, knocking him to the ground. The man tried to shield himself, but Jett pinned him down with force, his teeth bared and a fierce growl freezing the intruder in fear. The second man, alarmed, ran toward a small room that was being vacated. He managed to open the door and locked himself inside, calling for his partner to follow him. The first intruder, seizing the moment, escaped Jett's grasp and rushed into the room, slamming the door shut behind him. Inside, they panted heavily, trying to come up with a plan while Jett remained outside, growling and barking non-stop, his threatening presence blocking any escape attempt. The barking and sounds of the struggle woke Charlotte. She stepped out of her room, still groggy, but stopped when she saw Jett in an attacking stance in front of the closed door. When she heard muffled voices inside, her heart raced. Grabbing the phone with trembling hands, she called the police. 2 men broke into my house. My dog has them cornered in a room, she explained quickly. While waiting for the police to arrive, Charlotte stayed by Jett's side. He never took his eyes off the door, alert to every movement inside. The intruders, trapped in the room, tried to open the window to escape, but it was locked. "We're trapped," one of them whispered, clearly terrified at the thought of facing the dog. Minutes later, the sound of police sirens lit up the street. Charlotte rushed to unlock the front door, keeping Jett by her side. When the officers entered, she pointed to the room. "They're in there," she said. The intruders, realizing they had no way out, surrendered immediately, coming out with their hands raised. As they were handcuffed, one of them muttered, "It was the dog. He wouldn't let us." "Out!" Jett stayed by Charlotte's side, vigilant, until the men were taken away. When everything finally settled down, she knelt beside Jett, hugging him tightly. "You saved me again, my guardian angel," she whispered, feeling more protected than ever. Jett, now calm, rested his head on her leg, as if to say his job was done. As the police sirens illuminated Charlotte's house in shades of blue and red, breaking the tension that had dominated the night, the officers arrived quickly and entered the house with flashlights and weapons drawn, ready to contain any threat. Charlotte, still trembling with nerves, pointed to the small room where the two intruders were locked inside. Jett remained by her side, alert to every movement. "They're in there," she said, her voice trembling but steady. Two officers carefully opened the door, ordering the men to come out with their hands up. With no options left, the intruders surrendered immediately. Their clothes were dirty, and their faces showed the fear they still felt after the confrontation with Jett. "It was the dog. He wouldn't let us out," one of them muttered as he was handcuffed. Once the situation was under control, one of the officers approached Charlotte and observed Jett, who still maintained a protective stance beside her. "This dog is a hero," the officer said with admiration. If it weren't for him, things could have ended differently. Charlotte bent down to pet Jett, feeling a wave of relief and gratitude wash over her. As the officers led the intruders to the patrol car, the investigation began immediately. Under interrogation, the men didn't take long to reveal the truth. Pressured by the questions and the evidence, they confessed that they had been hired by Ethan Martinez. "He wanted you to feel vulnerable, scared," one of the intruders said. "It was just supposed to be frightening, but that dog ruined the plan." Their words confirmed Charlotte's worst fears. With Ethan's name mentioned, the police acted quickly. They gathered enough information and evidence to issue an arrest warrant. Ethan was located and arrested the same day, this time with solid evidence linking his obsession with Charlotte to the break-in. The officers assured Charlotte that he would face severe charges, which meant a much longer sentence. The news of the arrest brought immense relief to Charlotte. For the first time in a long while, she felt that the nightmare was finally coming to an end. As Jett rested beside her, exhausted after the long night, she realized that she wasn't just safe because of the police, but primarily thanks to the dog who had become her best defense against the past that insisted on haunting her. The morning after the break-in brought an unexpected calm to Charlotte. She woke up to the sound of Jett moving at the foot of the bed. He looked tired but alert, as if he were still in protective mode. Charlotte sat beside him, gently stroking his head. "You saved my life, Jett," she said, her voice thick with emotion. He lifted his eyes to hers, and in that gaze, there was something profound, as if he understood exactly what he had done. In the days that followed, Charlotte couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. Jett's bravery that night not only impressed her, but also touched her on a level she couldn't quite explain. He was not just a dog she had rescued. He was her protector, her companion, and proof that love and loyalty could emerge even in the toughest circumstances. Jett also seemed different. He continued to follow her around the house, but now there was something new in his demeanor. It was as if he were even more connected to her, attentive to every movement or emotion. One afternoon, while sitting on the couch with Jett by her side, Charlotte began to reflect on everything she had been through. She remembered the moment she found him abandoned in the alley, thin and scared. Since then, they had both changed so much. Jett had regained his strength and confidence, and so had she. He hadn't just saved her physically that night. He had helped her overcome the fear that had consumed her for so long. Now, as Charlotte walked through the streets of North End with Jett beside her, he was not only a companion, but a presence that symbolized everything they had built together. Trust, strength, and a new beginning. In that moment, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Charlotte knew she was finally exactly where she was meant to be.